Thanks, I appreciate it. So this is super laid back. This is not a lecture. This is, hey, we're just hanging around, talk about brains, right? So as we're going through this, if you guys have like questions or thoughts or what the hell is this thing, like, any of that type of stuff, just go for it, it'll be fun. So, so like I said, my name's Daniel Dees. I'm a movement disorder neurologist at University of South Alabama. I did my undergraduate, my college of medicine, my neurology residency all at South Alabama, which is in Mobile. I did my fellowship at Medical College of Georgia, and then I moved back about 10 years ago and started the movement disorders program there. So it's been a lot of fun to be able to go do this stuff, and it's a great big honor to be able to work with HDSA and be able to talk to you guys. So I'm really, really proud about that. Some disclosures: I work with several pharmaceutical companies doing consulting type work. And then I also have a grant with HDSA. It's a patient care grant that goes through UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham. So I'm thankful for them for increasing that ability to go manage patients from a financial standpoint. So like I said, we're just going to kind of start with the basics of what is Huntington's disease. I tell my residents, my medical students, whatever type of doctor you're going to be, learn the history of it because it's going to make you better at what you do on a regular basis. And so, of course, Huntington's disease has been around for a long, long time, right? Like way longer than anybody has ever really thought about it. But it was first documented in literature by George Huntington in 1872. And so he wrote some case reports on it, and everybody thought, well, this is super rare. Like, this isn't going to be, like, okay, one-off thing. He's in, like, middle of nowhere, New York. All right, fine. And it turned out that this is not like a one-off thing. This is actually a really common thing. And this is a genetic problem. It's going to be autosomal dominant. So what that means is if mom has it, then each of mom's children will have a 50% chance of having Huntington's. And just because older brother had Huntington's doesn't mean that you're not going to get it. Like, it doesn't work. Brother had a 50% chance. You have a 50% chance. Younger sister has a 50% chance. And the problem is going to be it's a CAG repeat problem, which CAG is it's a DNA thing. And a lot of times on our chromosomes, we'll have these kind of like taglines at the very end of it of just a whole bunch of repeats that say, hey, we're done, And CAGs is one of those things. And sometimes if you have too many of those, that can get you into Huntington's disease. And so typically we say, and these are kind of ballpark numbers, but 32 to 36 is kind of a gray area. Less than 32, you're probably not going to get Huntington's. More than 36, you're probably going to get Huntington's, but it all kind of depends on how long do you live. The more CAG repeats that you have, the earlier your onset of disease is going to be. So for example, if you have, say, 40 CAG repeats, well, that's not a whole lot. So maybe you're going to have this a little bit later in life. 38, 40 CAG repeats, maybe you're going to get onset, I don't know, in your 50s or 60s, or you can even have onset in your 80s. Or maybe you have like a really big number. Maybe you have like, I don't know, 60 CAG repeats or 65 or something like that. And you're going to have onset when you're little, when you're a child. So there can be a lot of variability there. And then, what's really interesting about it, the CAG repeat, is it's very stable. Whatever that number is really stable in an egg. So in other words, if mom had 42, then it can go up or down when you get that gene by maybe like 1 or 2, but it's probably not going to vary that much. So in other words, like if mom had 42 and you got it from mom, then maybe you'll have like 40. Maybe you'll have 44, but you're probably going to be like 41, 42, somewhere in there. The opposite's true if you get it from dad. So the CAG repeat, if you get from dad, has a lot more variability to it. And it can go up or down by maybe like 7 or so, like 7 or 8. So, if dad had 42, well, maybe you're going to get 49. So you have a little bit earlier onset. Or maybe it goes in the opposite direction. Maybe dad had 42 CAG repeats and you get 35. And you got the gene from dad at 35. But remember we said 32 to 36 CAG repeats is kind of a gray area, a middle zone, and maybe you're going to get it, maybe you're not. And so dad can have 42 CAG repeats. You got his gene. Just through the luck of genetics, those CAGs drop to 35 because they're not stable in a sperm. You got the gene, and maybe you're not going to get Huntington's disease, which is fascinating, right? Anyways, so average age onset's age 40, but it can vary so much based off of what your CAG repeat number is. And once you start showing physical signs of Huntington's disease, this will play out over maybe 15 or 20 years, although everybody's different, right? I mean, like that's always kind of the fun part about medicine. Is so there can be so much variability. Yes, ma'am.
You're saying you get this CAG number. Does it change over time in your life, or that's just what it is?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, okay, you get this CAG number. Does that change? Can it go up or down as you're going through life? And that answer is no, it can't. Once you got those genes, that's what you got. Yes, sir.
For her question, what does the somatic instability do with the cat?
What does the instability do with what? Yeah, you can.
The somatic instability, kind of going off of her question, because he got it from his biological mom, 51,
Okay.
and he's 27 now, and he just got an examination. He's not diagnosed with it, or he's not diagnosed with it.
Hasn't started showing
Yeah.
any of the movements or anything, but he had the genetic test. That the genetic test said he's positive.
The somatic instability, and my question is, what about the hiccup that they have found on some of the repeats?
The hiccup that they found on some of the repeats. I don't know what you mean.
CAG, and then they're like CAGAA, and then it's that hiccup thing. I call it hiccup.
Yeah. I mean, there can be some variability in any of these things, and like and so the same thing. I was saying that there's kind of a gray area between 32 and 36, but you'll have documented cases of people having like 38 that make it to like age 80, die of a heart attack, and they never had Huntington's disease. So there can be some variability there. In the same way, you can have some really kind of wild things of people that have CAG repeat numbers that are much lower than 32 that have clinical Huntington's disease. And those things are super rare, but they're out there where you have like 29 CAG repeats and then you show clinical Huntington's disease. And what does that mean? Like is that even, does it just look the same? Is it a variation of the disease state? That's kind of one of my more interesting parts about my job is that, man, there's a lot of questions out there and all the good answers give you more questions, right? It's a great question. That's fantastic. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Just back on this question.
Yeah.
When we got it certain numbers, but as this gentleman just mentioned, that the somatic instabilities, are we talking about the expansion, actual expansion happening in a particular brain region, and then, or is that just happening in different cell types, or what?
I'm sorry, I just don't understand your question.
Say, I think I heard the terms about the somatic instability.
I think what you're saying is, can the disease progress faster in certain parts of the brain or slower parts of the brain?
I see what you mean, yeah. So what's interesting about Huntington's is most genetic problems, it's that all that DNA creates a protein, and that protein you think of it as like a molecular tool. It's got a job within the cell it's supposed to go do. And most genetic diseases happen because the gene didn't create the protein right, and then the protein doesn't work right. So in other words, I got this machine that's supposed to make wrenches for my tool shop, but it doesn't correctly make the wrench, and so then the wrench can't do the job that I need it to do. Can you tell I like to work on cars? I don't know. That's just where my mind went. But what's different in Huntington's is that the protein that it makes causes problems. The abnormal protein causes problems. And it's not just in the brain, but it's everywhere. Like you'll find that abnormal protein in your big toe, which actually, it's a topic for later in the afternoon of some of the non-motor symptoms in Huntington's disease. And not just like the things like depression and anxiety and these sorts of things, but things like, how it affects your gallbladder, because it's kind of everywhere that you go there too. That's a great question. Okay, so Huntington's, because it's doing all of this stuff, it's not just a movement problem, but we're talking about non-motor problems and like how it affects your GI tract and constipation and all these sorts of things. It's important to kind of approach it from a all-around level. Good communication with your neurologist, your movement disorder neurologist, your psychiatrist, psychologist, internal medicine doctor, all those types of things. Secretly, I'm an optimist. I'll admit this, and kind of not so secretly. I love this. This is Ram Dass. I'm not this body. I am in this body, and this is a part of my incarnation. I honor it, but it isn't who I am. So in other words, this is my physical presence, but this isn't who I am. My personality, my human being, my actions, that is who I am as a person. Okay, let's talk about stages in Huntington's disease. In Huntington's, early stage, we're going to call it early, middle, and late stages of Huntington's. Early stage, patients they can go do stuff. They're functional. They can go to work, they can drive, they can do their money, they can have their job, they can go through life. Symptoms that you'll get some minor involuntary movements, and I got some videos of those, and we'll look at them. And maybe some problems thinking through complex things like problem solving and this sort of stuff. Although some of that stuff can also be related to things like depression, anxiety, all those things. And irritability, disinhibition, these things. That's early stages. And then middle stages. So individuals start losing the ability to work or drive and no longer able to manage their finances, or maybe they just need some help. So, classic things, and it's whatever you're into. So, the classic things of, I manage the checking account all the time, but then I forgot to pay the electric bill, and then they shut it off. And so now maybe the spouse pays the electric bill or the son or something like that. Although my confession to you is right now I need to pay my bills. They're late. So, it happens to the best of us, right? Like, it's okay. It's true. So they have a little bit of problem doing household chores. Or, maybe it was, they do woodworking out in the shop or something, and it used to be not a problem, but now they're having a little bit of problems like doing the math calculations on the woodwork or whatever. I've been taking apart transmissions in 65 Ford Mustangs since I was 18 years old, and now I got this one apart and I can't figure out how to put it back together. Like stuff like that would be kind of entry-level sort of things you would start seeing here. Starting to get a little bit more chorea, these flowing movements, and starting to have a little bit of, because of the chorea and bradykinesia and some of these movements we're going to talk about, you're starting to have problems doing the motor tasks that you're trying to do, so doing the thing. And you can also get into problems swallowing, choking on foods and liquids, starting to get off balance, kind of before you realize you're falling down, it's too late to do anything about it would be a classic line, so it's an internal sense of loss of balance. And a little bit more difficulty with some of the cognitive type things, processing information, this sort of stuff. And then late Huntington's disease, you're starting to need help with stuff. So starting to need help with activities of daily living. Sometimes because of falls, and one of the big things we're trying to do in managing Huntington's disease, I want to do one of two things. One, I want to keep you from choking on foods and liquids. And then two, I want to prevent you from falling down, because you fall down, you break arms and legs. And when you break arms and legs, then you have to have surgery to go get it fixed. And then you're laying in a hospital bed for 6 months. And then you get like bladder infections and pneumonias and blood clots and stuff like that. And those are all the classic ways that people die. So you're trying to prevent that scenario in the first place by preventing falls. And then what's interesting about as you're progressing in Huntington's disease, at the beginning of this disease, Huntington's is both too much movement and too little movement. And as you're progressing over time into late stage, you start not having too much movement anymore, and then it just becomes not enough movement, right? Which is really fascinating. Okay, so this is an example. This guy has Huntington's. And we're going to break down this video a little bit. But you see how I said it was too much movement and too little movement all at once. So he's having a hard time getting his feet to go as he's trying to walk, right? They get kind of stuck on the ground. And then he's got this kind of rigidity to him. But then he's got some of these extra movements too. He's such a nice guy. This guy's great.
So, question.
Sure.
Is there a geographic / racial predictor for Huntington's disease?
None that I know of.
Okay.
I don't believe there is.
So
It's
not
an
like
interesting
if you're
question.
from Northern Europe, you have an...
I mean, this is all over the world.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, you're talking about an autosomal dominant genetic disease that doesn't have any predisposition to breed itself out of the population. All right. So in other words, you got an autosomal dominant disease that most people don't recognize they have until they've already had kids. Right. Before you had genetic testing. I'm talking, going back 3,000 years or something like this. So then it's going to be all over the world. Yeah, great question. Yes, sir?
But I did see where Venezuela has a sort of a hot spot in terms of.
It's a classic one, yeah. It's a historically classic one, which was fascinating because before the early 1970s, we thought this was super rare. And then you had a small town that had a lot of it that then got well documented. And then we realized just how common this is. That was kind of famous. There was a bunch of videos. It's a famous story. There's a bunch of videos of it, of the people living in the small town. And they made it to the 100-year anniversary of George Huntington's original paper. It showed up like Washington, D.C. and said, hey, I got this like whole town, a bunch of people with Huntington's disease. And everybody's like, no, it can't be. Like, this is a rare thing. And then the guy shows the videos and everybody's like, oh, like that's a bunch of Huntington's disease. You know, like, it's okay to be humbled in medicine. That's exactly what you're talking about.
To the fact that it's a small town and there's a lot of family.
What made that one unique is that they were really isolated, small fishing village. They had excellent verbal records of families, and so you could track, and they kept verbal records of families, of the genetic lineage, and then two, they knew who all had this thing and who all didn't have this thing. And so then you could go back and talk to them. They had it all laid out and get a real idea as to how this sort of thing is inherited. And you don't see that very often in medicine. Sometimes you just get lucky as far as like progressing knowledge bases and stuff like that. And that one we just got lucky on. Okay, let's talk about the movement you get in Huntington's disease. So chorea is going to be a flowing movement. So flowing movement in X, Y, and Z planes of axis from one joint to the next. So flowing from my fingertips to my wrist, elbow, shoulders, and then back to my fingertips. So this is chorea. All right. Or sometimes, like maybe some of y'all have heard a term athetosis. Same thing. It's just everything slower and smaller. That's the only difference. Or like maybe if you work in medicine, you've heard the term chorea athetosis, like we're repeating ourselves. So athetosis would be everything's just kind of slower and smaller. Same stuff. And then ballism, maybe you've heard about ballism before, everything's just bigger and faster, right? It's all just chorea. So involuntary movement flowing in X, Y, and Z planes of axis from one joint to the next. You get bradykinesia, dystonia, which is involuntary muscle contraction that everybody in this room has experienced. It's kind of normal. And getting off balance, and then muscle jerks or Micron Jerk. So 90% of all patients have chorea. And like we're saying, it's these flowing type movements. This is entry-level chorea.
That looks like someone is in a movie or a theater filming their family member.
Oh, I don't know what this is. I kind of thought it might be church,
Okay.
but I didn't take the videos, so I don't know. But I was thinking about this, like trying to figure it out. But then, that's not a church pew, so I don't know. So maybe they're, maybe in a theater, but they're kind of dressed up a little bit. So I was thinking maybe a courtroom.
Not a movie theater, but
Oh.
a theater.
Oh, could be so. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know, man. I wish I could ask him now. I'm glad you guys have the same thoughts I have. So with entry-level chorea like this, and it can be even smaller than this, and it's not just in the hands. This is everywhere you got, right? So it can be in your toes, it can be in your hips and your shoulders and your hands and your head and your lips and all these sorts of things. I've never thought about it before, but the people that can wiggle their ears, they probably get a little chorea in their ears too. Like, oh man, I gotta. If I see one, I'm gonna videotape it. That's amazing. Yeah.
Is it completely random in that regard, or does it show up in certain areas more predominantly than others?
It's everywhere. Everywhere you got. If you go do a literature dive, you'll see that, oh, well, maybe like it's a little bit more in the face than in the hands. But as you and I are just talking, I'm looking at your face and your hands. But if you actually go look at where everything is moving. So for example, chorea of your toes. Most people don't want to be sick, right? And so, I'm a little embarrassed about this thing. And so, I'm going to try to kind of hide it as best I can. And so you'll take, if you get chorea in the toes, classic thing to do is they're sitting down and people will purposefully push their feet into the ground because then you can kind of hide it. And I had a patient that, it wasn't a Huntington's patient, but he had chorea of his feet. And we got through the whole conversation and all the stuff, and the wife's like, hey, tell him about the shoes. I was like, I don't know whatever the hell is about the shoes, but this is going to be good, right? So tell me about the shoes. I want it. And the guy was, he was working in like a warehouse type facility, and he had to wear boots, but they were rubber-soled shoes. And he had enough chorea in his toes that he was like removing the rubber. He was wearing out the rubber on the toes of the shoes enough so that he had to like replace the shoes once a month because like his toes were on the concrete. Like that is brutal, right? Like that is some incredible chorea. So entry-level chorea like this, it's very common that folks don't even recognize it. Like, and maybe you just got like, this was my foot. Maybe you just got like a little bit in the foot, you know, or maybe you've just got something like this, and you don't know, you know, you're just watching the movie or something, or you know, whatever, the recital, I don't know, and you don't notice it, but a lot of times the spouse will notice it. And so, in a lot of times with this type of stuff, you ask the person, they're like, this doesn't really bother me. And then you ask the spouse, and like, but it bothers me. And so, okay, but when it bothers the spouse, then it's going to bother the husband or something, right? Because it all comes around. Okay, this is a little bit more chorea, right? And this is where we're talking that it's not just in hands, but it's in lips and tongue and shoulders and everything, right? So this is a lot. And then standing up, and she gets a little off balance here too. So it could be a lot of chorea. And
severity, can you talk about severity a little bit more, just in terms of like, how common it is in terms of range of severity?
It depends on how long you've had Huntington's. Yeah. So Huntington's is going to be a steadily progressive disease state. And it starts out as too much movement, which is these videos, and too little movement, which I'll show you those videos and demonstrate that in a moment. And then as you progress, you the part of the brain that's doing the too much movement, that gets worn out, that gets destroyed. And then you just have the part of the brain that's doing too little movement. But it can be, I mean, that's pretty brutal, right? Here, we'll go back. You know, there's a lot of medicines for all these extra movements. And, you know, the patient always gets a choice. But if you're on this level, hey, let's talk about some pills, right? Because this is really going to mess up your day. Yeah.
So how long do you think that woman has been symptomatic?
This is not my patient, so I would just be guessing out of the air.
But a while.
Yeah, I don't know, 7, 8 years, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there, just best guess. Maybe longer, maybe 10.
Okay.
Yeah, longer.
But not like one.
No. Like the first one with the woman that, I don't know, what band was she going to see? I don't know. She was going to see the symphony. Great. The Philharmonic? Yeah, they were doing some Baroque piece. I don't know. It wasn't really my jam, but, you know.
Living her best life.
Damn right. Yeah, that's important. So she would have had this like a year or so or something.
I'm sorry.
She would have maybe had this like a year or two or something like that. I'm just making up the numbers because I don't know.
I'm
But
just trying to get a
yeah, I got you.
ballpark.
Okay. So these types of extra movements are going to create problems, right? Enough so that you imagine, like if you're already a little bit off balance and you don't start getting off balance until later on too, like we were talking, like you kind of lose this central sense of balance, and then you're having all these extra movements, you can see how that could knock you off your balance, and then you can't, you'll fall down and hit the ground. So that would be a pretty common thing too. And it's going to be hard to, if you're involuntarily moving like this, it's going to be hard to, I don't know, make the sandwich or, do whatever you're trying to do, work the keyboard and the mouse, And with all these extra movements with the chorea, a lot of times it gets undertreated. So this was a survey of Huntington's patients in 2016 that said 40% of patients said that they were either unaware or not utilizing medicines for chorea. So kind of interesting. So I'm going to kind of briefly, we're talking about milestones, but we're here, so I thought I'd briefly talk about some of the medicines to go treat these things with. So for the extra movements, too much movement we think of as a dopamine problem. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter that does movement. So an example of too little movement would be the classic one that people recognize would be Parkinson's disease. There's not enough dopamine in the brain to make the movements go right in Parkinson's, and so you get these small, slow movements. But for all these extra movements, what if we use medicines that work by blocking dopamine? And so these are kind of some of the older, we call them antipsychotics, but we use them for a lot of different things. These all came out in the late 50s and early 60s and stuff like that. So the classics, Haldol, Pimzide, Thorazine, Mellaril, Prolixin, all that stuff. You can use those. They're older medicines. They tend to make people sleepy. And whenever I'm talking with somebody about extra movements in Huntington's, I'll tell you my goal for this, my goal isn't to make all of the movements go away, because I probably can't do that. But my goal is to make the movements go away enough that it doesn't bother you, that you don't notice them, that you can go about your day. So those are kind of older medicines. Newer medicines, these all came out in the 1990s. They're called the atypical antipsychotics, or second-generation antipsychotics. So things like Risperdal, Seroquel, Abilify, Zyprexa, Geodon, Clozaril, all these types of things. They'll make you sleepy too, but maybe not as much. And so typically people can tolerate these medicines pretty well. The way these things are going to work is these are going to be dopamine receptors, all the ones that I've talked about in the last two slides, which basically is just like the blue one at the top, that's the neuron that's talking. The green one at the bottom, that's the neuron that's listening. And we're going to talk by way of dopamine. And so we got to release the dopamine from the blue one on top so that it can interact with the dopamine receptors on the bottom and transfer that signal. And basically all you're doing with these medicines is you're blocking that dopamine receptor so that the dopamine can't hit it, can't bounce off of it. All right, so maybe, I've never thought about this before, but maybe it's like you pick up the telephone to call your friend and the line's busy, right? It's blocked because they're talking to somebody else. And then the other class of medicines to go treat these extra movements with, we call the Vmat Two Inhibitors. So these would be medicines like tetrabenazine, deuterated tetrabenazine, valbenazine. And these are going to work a little bit differently. So these are the talking receptors on top here, and the listening receptors on the bottom. And we're not messing with the dopamine receptors on the listening neuron, but we're preventing the ability of the dopamine to reaccumulate back in the talking neuron. You got me? So in other words, to make this system work, I've got the presynaptic little bubble full of dopamine in the talking neuron, and it's going to dump that dopamine, those little blue circles out, into the synaptic cleft, so the area where they're talking. And then that dopamine is going to get actively pumped back into the presynaptic neuron, and then actively pumped back into the little bubble that's the holding cell for it, and we're preventing it from reaccumulating back into that little holding cell, that little holding bubble. So that's what you're doing with medicines like tetrabenazine, deuterated tetrabenazine, valbenazine. Tetrabenazine, some of y'all may recognize that name. It's been around for a long time, since 1970s. What's interesting about that one is that, okay, I got a confession to the room, all right? My background's in chemistry, so give me 30 seconds to nerd out, and then we'll move on. Is that cool? All right, thank you, I appreciate it. There's probably at least one other chemist in the room, so we're gonna have a moment, and then we'll go. So with tetrabenazine, it's got two chiral centers. So when it gets broken down into 4 different molecules in equal numbers. So it's going to be 25% each of these 4 different molecules. The problem with tetrabenazine is that 2 of those molecules, they cause problems. They make you sleepy or other stuff. One of those molecules doesn't do anything. So it's not active. And then one of those molecules is the one that you want that does what you want to do, right? And so because of that, you get into some problems with tetrabenazine. And the biggest one is that it makes you sleepy. A third of patients or so out of 54 were getting sleepy on tetrabenazine. And typically that's at higher dosages. And it can also cause some extra small, slow movements too. Okay. So then I said deuterated tetrabenazine. What's that, right? Wow. Yeah. So when this universe was made, hydrogen atom, you get 3 things in there, right? Classically. You get a proton, neutron, electron. That's it, right? If you add an extra proton to it, it's no longer a hydrogen atom, it becomes a helium atom. If you add an extra neutron into it, which is the blue dot, the big blue dot, then you get a deuterium, which is just hydrogen, but it weighs a little bit more, right? So Big Bang happened, boom, universe happened, something like 0.0197% of all hydrogens in the universe became deuteriums instead of just regular old hydrogens. They're fine. They're in the water. They're in me. They're in my coffee. Not a big deal. It's not like radioactive or anything like that. And then a much smaller percentage became tritium. Now, tritium's different. It's got 2 extra neutrons, and that is kind of the nuclear thing that you're thinking of. You can make, power plants out of it and all that type of stuff. We're not talking about tritium. We're talking about deuterium. The point being that there's just as much as it's safe. It's all over the universe, in the oceans, in your drinking water. But what's cool chemistry about it is if you add those extra deuteriums at the right place in tetrabenzene, which is deuterated tetrabenzene, then you start shifting things around. Remember I said before, you get 25% of each of these molecules, right? But now because you added the extra weight, the extra density on one side of it, you get way more in product number 1, which is what you want, and way less in the other 3, which is what you don't want. And so people tolerate the medicine better. And you get things like regular tetrabenzene you're taking 3 times a day, deuterated tetrabenzene you're taking twice a day, stuff like that. It's neat chemistry. So this is just showing you how long these medicines last, in that you get a longer half-life with deuterated tetrabenzene, which is the blue line there, versus the red is regular tetrabenzene. And this is just a quick breakdown of the adverse drug effect. This is all from the FDA indications of these drugs. Adverse drug effect profiles with deuterated tetrabenzene, which people tolerate it really well. So you get somnolence is 4% versus placebo 7%. So what does that even mean? Headache 5%, placebo is 8%. You start looking for what is greater than placebo, and it's like nasopharyngitis. Sometimes people just get runny noses, and it doesn't have anything to do with it. But if you get athlete's foot fungus in this study, like you got to report it, right? So these things kind of show up a little bit. Okay. There's going to be a natural variability from one day to the next of anything, right, of any symptoms. And there are going to be some things that make all of these extra movements worse. And so with chorea, these things are going to be worse if you get stressed out, frustrated, angry, upset, lack of sleep, caffeine, morning after alcohol. If you get really excited, just got like really great news, like just won the lottery, your chorea is going to be worse. Or you just got terrible news, somebody's in the hospital. Or you get really angry, like you get a speeding ticket. Like this happened to me like when I was a resident a long time ago, but I got a speeding ticket. I was trying to get to the hospital for a stroke code. I'm like, damn it, man. Like I gotta go. Like this is important. He's giving me the speeding ticket and all this stuff. And then you're kind of angry at yourself too because you got the speeding ticket. And so then I had a little tremor in my hand, and they get you the tiny little box that you got to sign in. You're like, okay, now you guys are just being jerks. But all of these things are going to make your chorea worse. Okay, I said that Huntington's is both too much movement and also too little movement, right? And the too little movement, fancy word for that is bradykinesia, which just means not enough movement. And so with bradykinesia, I ought to be able to make this big, fast movement like this, right? Something like that is pretty normal. With bradykinesia, it can be that the whole thing is too slow, or it can be that it starts out big, and then as I keep going, it gets smaller and smaller. Or I'm going, and I'm doing okay, and then it gets stuck, and then I start going again, okay? All 3 of those things are bradykinesia. So it takes you longer to go do stuff, hair and makeup, or buttons, or these types of things, longer to go do things in life. This patient doesn't have Huntington's disease, but she's got bradykinesia, and so I'm using this video to show you what bradykinesia looks like. I was going to show you the video, and now I'm going to show you here. Okay, so this is bradykinesia.
Big and wide and as fast
See how
as you can do it.
slow these movements are? And you get kind of a
Big and wide and fast.
lack of movement in the face, too.
Okay, switch hands.
Really focused.
Yeah, she's trying hard.
Big and wide and fast.
So
Fast,
this
fast,
is
fast.
an example of bradykinesia, right? So you'll have both too much movement, chorea,
Okay.
and bradykinesia
Go as
at
fast
the
as you
same
can.
time in the same hand.
and switch hands. Get all the way open. Ready, go.
In the feet too.
Okay? Can you do it faster?
Let's go back here. Okay. So bradykinesia, how will you go about that? Well, we said that these medicines like the dopamine receptor blockers and risperidol and these sorts of things, they work by blocking dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of movement, so they can make, if you give enough of these medicines to anybody, you can cause them to have some bradykinesia. All right, so then maybe it's just we need to stop taking, or we need to decrease the dose of this medicine because it's making you a little bit too slow. Like remember, because we're using these medicines for all the extra movements, and then maybe it's a little bit too much, and we got to decrease that dose. The other thing, the HDSA website's really awesome. Like you guys go check it out. There's so many cool resources there. But they got this, it's like a pamphlet for physical therapy, occupational therapy, stuff like that. Check it out, man. Okay, so they also get dystonia. And dystonia is going to be, it's a too much movement problem. So it's involuntary muscle contraction, and it's something that everybody in this room has experienced at one point in time or the other. So an example, like entry-level example of dystonia, is you get that little twitch in the corner of your eye when you're stressed out, frustrated, lack of sleep, too much caffeine, morning after alcohol, all that same stuff we've been talking about. That's actually a version of dystonia. It's really annoying that you can kind of work it out and then it goes away, right? One of my more favorite things when I get this, I lecture a lot to medical students. And you can tell the second-year medical students, which in my mind is like the most stressful year, they're twitching all over the place, and that's okay. Like I get dystonic tremor in my hand. Yeah. So then it's cool, okay? Because then I can be like, hey, here, let me show you. Do you mind? You see this hand, this finger right there? It kind of moves back and forth. It's okay. Like there's variability in how our brains do movements, right? So that's a dystonic tremor. I don't know if you could hear that, but he confirmed that I didn't, like it wasn't a plan or anything. Gotcha. Yeah.
I got the check earlier.
Yeah. Don't worry, I don't pay my bills, so good luck. So you can get these extra movements, or sometimes I'll get dystonia in my peroneus longus in my right leg. I don't know, man, I didn't sign up for this. But in Huntington's disease, you can get a lot more dystonia than just that. And so all the muscles will get stiff and rigid, and it can be kind of truncal axial, and so a lot of times you'll see like the posture is kind of like this, and there's no such thing as symmetry in biology. So like the shoulders may not line up with the hips, so there'll be a little bit of a rotation there. Would be pretty classic. And it can be uncomfortable. So how do you go treat dystonias? Well, dystonias are pretty difficult to treat. I don't get a lot of good options there. Botulism toxin injections was like Botox. It just works by weakening muscles, and that creates problems too, right? So if you got like terrible dystonia of your hand, and I go inject the muscles in your hand and make it so that it just flops around, I don't think I helped you. You can't like grab the coffee or something. Oh, you haven't seen this one yet, have you? You get medicines like Artane or trihexyphenidyl, or cogentin, benztropine. Those are the name brand generics. These medicines have been around forever, longer than 50 years. And at really high dosages, they can help out. But the problem is most people can't tolerate those dosages because it causes dry mouth, dry eyes. In older patients, starting about age 60, confusion, hallucinations. So there's the dystonia. There's not a lot of great options there. This guy, remember him? Now see how he's walking. He's got the bradykinesia of his feet, and they get kind of stuck to the ground. But then he's also got truncal dystonia here. You see how the shoulders and the hips are kind of up like this, right? And then he's got some of these extra movements with the arms too. So he's got some of the chorea. So we're kind of putting together all of these different concepts at the same time in the same person. Yeah.
Is it safe to assume that this is an untreated person, or could he be on treatment? And
I don't know. This was not my patient, although I had ended up treating his son. that we're going to see him a little bit later. I would expect that he's taking medicines, but I just don't know.
Okay.
There's no way for me to say. Okay, that's it. So, like, this list is starting to sound familiar, right? So any of these extra movements, whether it be tremor or chorea or dystonia or any of these types of things, is going to be worse when you get stressed out, frustrated, angry, upset, too much caffeine, morning after alcohol, excited, frustrated, all that type of stuff. And you know, with that type, that's a part of life. I mean, you can try to get enough sleep. You can not drink alcohol or caffeine, but there's stress and anxiety and frustration. I mean, this is life, right? You can't make those things go away. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so on caffeine and I read that it helps with chorea. And is that true?
Caffeine's probably going to make your chorea worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now caffeine can be helpful with things like constipation. Huntington's patients will get constipation.
Right.
You know, that's a classic one. I think society kind of gets that idea. But I would expect caffeine to be worse. Yeah.
So your slides are stressing just for today. So is that saying that if you drink caffeine or alcohol, it would make it worse for that day or the morning after, but not in the long term?
That's right. Yeah, it's not like it's if you're pounding Budweisers and Folgers, that it's going to. That's such a dumb idea, but that's what came up. Yeah, you get. I don't know, man. So you got your Budweisers and your Folgers. This isn't going. It's a bad idea. One, so don't do that. Two, it's not going to change where you are 5 years down the road or anything like that. It's just today is a bad day because I'm really stressed out. So I've got extra movements. You know, that type of thing. It's a great question. Getting off balance. So earlier onset in Huntington's, they're not going to get off balance. They do pretty good. And then later on in Huntington's, they start getting that internal sense of loss of balance. And then, especially when we're talking if they have all these extra chorea, they can knock you off your center of gravity. But typically, you know, most folks, if I'm off my center of gravity, I can take that step to the side and go catch my balance, and then I'm okay. But if I don't necessarily realize that I'm off balance, and then two, I've got these small, slow movements, the bradykinesia, so I can't take that big step over to the side, then I'm more likely to fall down. So, yeah.
For these, for movement and stuff, for falls, is it advisable for individuals to engage in anything that increases their sense of balance or activities?
Yeah. So.
Gymnastics, riding a bike.
Yeah.
Yoga, something like that.
Yeah. There's a question.
Does that help the overall slow the progression of the disease, or slow it down?
Yeah, so things like exercise, physical therapy, yoga, stuff like that, does it slow down the progression of disease, or does it just help where you are today? And it helps where you are today. It's not going to change the progression of the disease over time. But those things are real, and they really do help. So for example, a classic one is you're doing physical therapy. And you go do 6 weeks of physical therapy, and you're doing better. But then you don't do anything after that. You just go back to, I don't know, hanging on the couch or something. And then you go back to where you were before. Like you've got to keep doing the exercises, whether it be physical therapy or yoga or Tai Chi or whatever. Like those exercise programs are important for a lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
But there is, at least in the animal models, some evidence that early, especially since we're here talking about early, aerobic activity is neuroprotective, and so it could slow down, and they are looking at it in humans, and there's a lot of recommendations about intensity, and so it's not just going for a walk, but it's going for a walk and doing it at an intensity level that actually hits kind of an aerobic zone. And the HDSA and a lot of the other HD have a lot of information out there. So I would definitely go and look at that, because it is one of the things early on that you have the ability to kind of
Right on. So we're talking about her and how this much chorea can knock you off balance. And that's just kind of an example of the concept there. What we were saying, physical therapy, occupational therapy is, like I said, the HDSA website is really cool. Go check it out. And then on top of those things, you have things like ambulation devices. So whether that be 4-prong cane or walker or wheelchair or electric wheelchair or whatever, and that's where folks like physical therapy, occupational therapy can be really helpful of saying, you know what, this is, the 4-prong cane is the right one for this person, or, the walker is the right one for this person. And then this type of stuff tends to be underrated, but making changes in the home. So, handrails in the house, going down the hallway, handrails in the bathroom so I can get onto and off of the toilet. Or like the handicap toilet seats, which are basically just taller to help you get up there. Or getting rid of the rugs and stuff like that in the house, because it's really easy to trip on the rugs. Or watch out for the shoes on the floor or something in the middle of the night that you don't see them and then you trip and fall that way. Yes, sir.
Does, I guess, bradykinesia affect when somebody's falling too? Because that's what I've noticed.
Yes.
With, my wife, early on, she wasn't falling or tripping at any more frequency than I would, let's say. But when she would, I would notice she wouldn't. It would take her a while to try to break it, so the fall became worse than.
Yeah, that's it. That's classic. Yeah. So he's saying is that with the small slow movements with bradykinesia, once you trip on the rug or something, does the bradykinesia affect your ability to recover from that? And the answer is absolutely, because then I can't take that big step forward that I need to all of a sudden to be able to catch myself so that I don't hit the ground. Yeah. Then my client, yeah.
Does head trauma have any effects on the brain's ability to kind of fight off the Huntington?
I don't think so. That would be a really hard one to do. The reality is most people have fallen and had concussions and stuff like that. And I know I've had several concussions, and that's okay. And then you could also say, well, brains tend to be accumulative of life experience and all that sort of stuff. So, I'd think less likely, but possible would be where I would go. Good question. Myoclonic jerk. So myoclonic jerk is, again, something that everybody in the room has experienced. So this is going to be a real quick, brief movement that is faster than I can demonstrate it for you. So we would define myoclonic jerk as involuntary muscle contraction lasting less than 100 milliseconds, right? Because you can't move on your own voluntarily that quick. An example of myoclonus would be, most common time you're going to get this is as you're transferring from awake to asleep. So you're sitting there and you're transferring, and then you get that kind of, like that type of thing. That's it, right? Or what is also, I can't tell you how many consults we get for that. And that's fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's normal. Or another version of myoclonic jerk. Sometimes it happens if you're just hanging out on the couch. I don't know. It probably happens to me twice a month or something. You just hang out on the couch watching whatever, and then what was that, right? It's okay. It's normal. This is a little more, is that what we're going to play?
It's so fast you can't see it.
Yeah, it's so fast you couldn't see it. You're right. That was it. I'm sorry. That was beautiful. Yeah, that was fantastic. Love it. Let's see if I can find her. Oh, no. Well, man, I just don't see it. I'm sorry, that one may not have made the transfer. Okay, that's all right. So with these quick muscle jerks like that, these are going to be, they don't typically cause a lot of problems, but it's just one of the other things that you're going to see with this. Okay? And actually, I can point it out in one of the videos here. Okay. So this is the previous patient's son that we were talking about. And he's got a lot of these extra movements too. Okay. And his feet are kind of getting stuck to the ground a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to pull him back. Here, buddy. But I want you to move your feet.
So here he's going to catch himself. The second one doesn't count. He's not ready for it. So that didn't count. We got to give him a little time here. Okay, this third one, okay, he's ready for it now. All right, here we go. Boom, catches himself.
All right.
Go right ahead.
And with, so a lot of extra movements here. In the eye movements you're going to get is, where there's really two components to eye movements. It's decreased saccadic length and decreased saccadic velocity. I ought to be able to move my eyes all the way, looking all the way to the right, to all the way to the left in one, boom, instantaneous movement. And what you'll see in Huntington's disease is either the whole thing can be too slow, or that it just takes you a couple times to get there. So one, blink, reset, boom, go.
Just look at my hand. Don't do anything. Look over here.
So he's demonstrating, he's got full range of motion here.
Look up. Look down. Look to your nose. Look here. Look quickly to your right.
Now we're going to move quick, and boom, they get stuck right there.
Look to your right. Look to your
So this can be something that a lot of people may not notice. Sometimes folks with Huntington's will notice that I can't get my eyes to go where I really want them to go, like I want to do, right? And so sometimes they'll, instead of like moving my eyes to get all the way over there, I just kind of turn my head, something like that. Okay, that's it. Such a nice guy. Yeah. And so choking on foods and liquids, we're kind of putting all this together with choking on foods and liquids too. If I have these small, slow movements, it's not just in my hands, it's everywhere that I got. And so the small, slow movements will be in the muscles that do like swallowing and clearing the throat and even talking, right? And so you get like food will get kind of stuck in the throat because I can't do the big movement that I need to chunk and swallow the apple. Not the whole apple, you took a bite out of the apple. Don't swallow the whole apple, yeah.
Would that also go for apply to like phlegm? Is it harder
Yeah.
to handle phlegm?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very similar. Just trying to like clear the throat, that type of thing. Speech therapy can be really helpful with this type of stuff. So go to speech therapy; they're fantastic. So these are just review things. We're talking about some of the movements that you get with Huntington's and kind of classifying where they are as you're going through. So early stages of Huntington's, people can go do stuff. You can go do life, keep working, driving, taking care of the checkbooks, and paying your bills, and just going through life. And you can get some of these minor things, but they don't really create that much of a problem. Depression, irritability, that type of stuff. We're going to talk about that this afternoon, but those sorts of things are real. And we looked at this before. She's at the local harmonic, listening to some Baroque music and just really having a good time. I like it. Yeah. And then middle stages of Huntington's, you're starting to lose the ability to do things like going to the work, although a lot of that can depend on what sort of work you're doing. Like if you're, I don't know, working on rooftops, if you're replacing shingles, like maybe this is not a good idea. Like if, I don't know. And so it's a little more difficult to go through the household chores, eat, dress, hygiene, activities of daily living, hair and makeup, earrings, ties, all that sort of stuff. Starting to get a little bit more into the problem, swallowing, choking on foods and liquids, balance being off, falling down to the ground, those sorts of things. Starting to become a little bit more of a problem. And then later on in Huntington's disease, these patients are going to need help with activities of daily living. You're still aware of what's going on around you, but you can't get the movements to do what you want to go do, right? Which can be very frustrating. And a lot of times the chorea can be really wicked, but by this point in time, a lot of times you burn out that part of the basic ganglia, that part of the brain that's doing all the extra movements. So a lot of times it becomes more like small, slow movements. And then things like depression, anxiety, stress, all these types of things become a real component, all these non-motor things. This is such a common question. I thought I would just go ahead and head it off. Is that okay? Everybody likes marijuana and Cbd oil now. Okay, let's talk about it. We said that with things like chorea and dystonia and all these types of things, they're going to be worse if you get stressed out, frustrated, angry, upset, lack of sleep, all that type of stuff. And therefore, they'll be better if you're in a relaxed state of mind. And it doesn't matter how you get into that relaxed state of mind. If it's prayer, meditation, yoga, sunsets, glass of wine, I don't care, right? Like, if marijuana or CBD oils put you in a relaxed state of mind, then okay, maybe it'll help with your extra movements. There's a lot of people where these things will not put you in a relaxed state of mind and put you in a very not relaxed state of mind. And this is going to be a terrible idea for you. If you already have some amount of things like confusion and hallucinations and that sort of stuff, whether by adverse drug effect or whether by Huntington's or whatever, weed's probably a really bad idea, right? So let's not add weed on top of that. And then with CBD oils, I thought this was really fascinating. CBD oils, what is it? Okay, so there's an approval for a seizure medicine for a rare subtype of seizures that like 4-year-olds get, like little kids get. And so we looked at, if you take 50 random CBD oils from online, and they'll tell you the concentration of that CBD oil. And then if I want to match the concentration in the seizure medicine, how much of the CBD oil would I have to drink, right? Or take or whatever, drop on my tongue, I don't know, put it in my ear, like whatever you want to do with it. And the answer was the smallest volume per day was a gallon jug of CBD oil per day.
For a 4-year-old.
For an adult, however, I don't know who's ever taken this thing, man. And then the largest volume was a 55-gallon drum of CBD oil per day. So it's probably not. If it makes you better today, then cool, that's great. I got no problem with that. But I want my patients to understand where the money's going, because some of the stuff can be really expensive, and then how the dosing thing works out. And so everybody's different. If it works for you, then that's cool. But I just want you to know where it goes, because sometimes you see, like I love the optimism, but you'll have patients that are spending $1,000 a month on different products, and they don't really see the difference. Okay, well, $1,000 a month is a lot to a lot of people, I think. To some people, maybe that's not a whole lot of money. To some people, that's just impossible. But I just want you to know where all that thing lies.
Are there studies about how marijuana helps in kind of movement disorder, or are we not able to study it since it's still federally?
You can study it. You see the result of exactly what we're talking about. That, when you see things like, marijuana made my Parkinson's tremor better. Well, it's because you're in a relaxed state of mind. Now, that one that I don't know if it exists, which would be really interesting, is how do you grade a relaxed state of mind? Well, if we were going to use something really simple like a Likert scale, like on 0 to 10, and 10 is you are just like peace, baby, and then 1 is you're at the DMV, then and then if you say, because you got to compare apples to apples, right? And so you say, okay, well, how bad is your tremor when you're at an 8 on this scale? And then we'll take all the 8s and put them together, and then we'll see a weed versus not weed, like where your thing is. That'd be how you break it down. By setting up the study that way, it'd be really hard to make it statistically significant, would be my guess. But I don't know. Great question. So one concept that I think is really important is let's just sit and talk about this stuff. About Huntington's disease, about different medicines and stuff like that. Like, don't be afraid to talk about it. Understand the importance of your neurologist, your movement neurologist, but then also family members, friends, wherever your social support group is, whether that be at the church or the community or the whatever, I don't know, the music hall. Use those things, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the counselors, all those things are really important. So don't forget about that. And hope. Oh, I just love the Dalai Lama. Yeah. There's so many great pictures of this guy. Like, he's a prankster. But under no circumstances should you lose hope. It's just wonderful. And then, this is Pope Francis. You love that guy too. Hope opens new horizons, making us capable of dreaming of what's not even imaginable. So just fantastic. That's all I got. Thoughts or questions?
My question is, what happens when you get bad information from a neurologist? What do the parents or the partner or the family do with the bad information? In our case, he was told of his results over the phone instead of coming in. My wife had breast cancer 10 years before that. Same thing over the phone.
Right.
But with him, he was a Marine Marine at the time, and
Mhm.
the neurologist said, he's a young man, 21 years old, he can handle this news, he's a Marine.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
then-
that's not great. Yeah.
And then the neurologist says, beer has no effect on this disease at all.
Uh-huh.
He can party as much as he wants, and it ain't gonna hurt him. So what do family members, parents, siblings, how do they get across to him that it's wrong information?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. So the question is, what if you're seeing the neurologist and you're getting some kind of bad information about it? And then how do you go about that? Like, I'd encourage you to see a movement disorders trained neurologist because it's a different level of training.
He was a neurologist.
Uh-huh.
He did not specialize
Yeah.
in movement disorders.
Yeah, yeah. And so what that means is, and this is a really common thing. I think most people think, oh, that's the neurologist. It doesn't get more specialized than that. And that's not the case. There's a bunch of different subspecialties within neurology, whether that be seizures or stroke or neuromuscular and MS and all these sorts of things. So what it means is, for example, I'm a movement disorder neurologist. I finished my neurology residency. Once I did that, I could have gone out in the community and been a general neurologist, but instead I did additional training as a movement disorders fellow. So I did my fellowship at Medical College of Georgia, and all I did was movement disorders. So with a general neurologist, it's not necessarily their fault. They just didn't get exposed to that in their training on the same level of, say, a movement disorders neurologist. At the same point in time, my advice to you is don't let me cut out your appendix, right? Because I'm not trained to go do it. I mean, like, did I do that when I was a third-year medical student one time? Sure, but things are going to get a little rusty, So come see me for your Huntington's disease. Don't see me for your appendix. There's a level of training there that becomes important. Yeah.
And also just a suggestion that even if there isn't an HD Center of Excellence right next to you, if there's one that you can even get to, a lot of us will see a family even once a year
Yeah.
and then communicate with the neurologist and whoever is the person that you'd see regularly. And that initial meeting or even a couple of times can really help set not just you as the patient, but maybe all the family members to expectations. And an HD Center of Excellence should have the capability to have you see multiple people in one appointment.
Yeah.
So just something to consider.
That's very real.
possible.
Yeah.
Here's the problem with us. We don't live in the lower 48. We live in Alaska. So
Oh, yeah. Tough.
I've literally have had doctors tell us, we can't treat you. We won't treat you unless you move to the States.
Yeah.
And then I've had doctors. You remember when all the people when the teacher pulled down the map of the United States? I swear to God, this has happened to me. Alaska's next to Mexico.
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty tough. So living in a really rural area like Alaska, even if it's just getting to see the movement neurologist one time a year, every time I go see a patient, I'm going to dictate a letter and send it to the general neurologist and the primary care doctor. And I can lay out the game plan of, hey, this is my anticipation is how things are going to go. If this happens in 5 months, then do this. So you're laying out the game plan for the local neurologist.
So as a movement specialist, you would dictate or make up a care plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then send it to the regular neurologist. And so they can execute the game plan. And then, like I see you maybe one time a year or something like that. Would be a very common way to go about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
Also, at a lot of centers of excellence, there's social workers.
Absolutely.
So I'm a social worker at a center of excellence. Even if you go once a year, that social worker can still do family meetings over Zoom or, on the
Luckily, we have the VA. Because
Yeah.
Perfect.
he's a 90% disabled Marine vet, so
Right.
we just moved from San Diego care to the University of Washington Center. So
Yeah,
it's only a 3-hour flight, but that's
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. Thank you for the social workers. Oh man, they're awesome. Like, utilize that resource because they can make magic happen on levels that I just can't do. It's a great question, great comment. Other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Movement disorders you mentioned like separate. Are they in the same patient? How do you see together all these?
All the different phenomenologies we were talking about. Yeah. So the question was, do you see all of this stuff in the same patient? The answer is yeah, you do. And you can see it at the same time, which is it's kind of wild to think about that you can have both too much movement and too little movement in the same hand at the same time, but that's real, right? And of course, not everybody gets all these things, but you can have these different things all in the same patient at the same time. Great question. Yep.
You kind of touched on this in the beginning of your slideshow.
Uh-huh.
But I think for a lot of people, one of the big things they want to know is, where am I going to be 5 years from now? Where am I going to be 10? What's my progression? How fast is this going to progress? How bad is it going to get, in the next 10 years? And I hear different things. I hear that, well, some people progress much faster than other people, but then I hear, you'll gain like a point per year or something like that, and it's gradual, it's slow, you'll see it coming on. Is there a way that we can say, all right, where are we going to be 5 years from now? Where are we going to be 10 years from now?
Yeah, so the question is, trying to predict the future of where this individual patient is going to go over the next couple of years. And that's a really difficult thing to do, right? Or like what I would say is always be careful when you're predicting the future. And because I don't have any guarantees, I don't know, I could start having Parkinson's disease or something next year, right? I can't predict that. And these sorts of things happen. Now with Huntington's disease, I can say that typically, and all I can say is classically, like the classical progression, right? Because everybody is a little bit different. But classically with Huntington's disease, you'll see progression from starting to have movements to end stages of disease over like 15, 20 years. Something like that would be classic. But the best predictor for the future is the past. So then however things have progressed for you over the past, say, 5 years, then you extrapolate that. If that continues on that certain rate, then where things will be 5 years from now is kind of the best way you can look at it. That's a good one. Other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
No, back to the CBD and the THC side of things. Were they all the same percentage of THC?
No, they're all different. Yeah, which is why it was different volumes for, we just looked it up online and saw what the percentages were of the different CBD oils and then calculated what it would take to match that in the seizure study. Yeah. It was a fun thing to do in an afternoon. It was very enlightening. Yeah.
You were talking about a section later today that talks about what
dysautonomia. Yeah.
What title is that in?
I'm co-giving that lecture at 1:30 or 1:45, but it's non-motor symptoms in Huntington's disease. It'll be really good. Some of because I'm going to lay out some of the movements again in that one because I think it's always a good foundation to have whenever you're talking about Huntington's disease. But then you start talking more about things like depression, anxiety, that type of stuff.
It's in this room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
It's in this room at 1:30.
1:30.
What's it called? Dealing with comorbidities and HD. Thank you.
Yeah, and then
So if you go to
No, go
the,
ahead.
go to the app,
I saw that one on the.
yeah, if you go to the app and you click on the speakers, you will then see per speaker. You can see their. Okay. That's how I.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, that works. And Dr. Huang's going to talk about some of the non-neurologic comorbidities, which it's cool. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of piggyback off the future telling question.
Mhm.
I know we had talked about the CAG repeats and particularly when it was like mother to daughter, the number being similar.
Yeah.
Could you kind of make the assumption that, like my mom's CAG and my CAG were very close?
Okay.
That my experience would be similar.
Roughly.
As far as onset and kind of.
Yeah, as far as age of onset and stuff like that. I mean, there can still be some variability there, but for like big picture, broad strokes things, you roughly expect, it's not like, at, I don't know, age 34 in 4 months, like boom, there, it's not that accurate, right? So plus or minus some years. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
In my husband's family, there were 5.
Wow.
And they started at different ages, different progression.
Yeah.
The same number of repeats within 4.
Yeah.
Some of them lasted 10 years, some of them
Could be
lasted
variable.
20 years.
Yeah.
And you really can't compare the CAG repeats
Yeah.
to what's gonna be your future.
Right.
It's,
There can be a lot of
it's
variability
all
there.
over the map.
Yeah, that's a good point. Other thoughts are, yeah.
To go along with that, like my mom and I have the same exact tag,
Okay.
but like she was a smoker and
Yeah.
not a healthy eater and didn't exercise, and so like
Makes
I
a
think,
difference.
Like, oh, I'm probably gonna be better off than her.
Yeah. Those sorts of
What
things.
is this about?
Yeah, no, those things make a difference. So the comment was, hey, my mom wasn't particularly healthy and smoking and a lot of stuff, and then I'm baseline kind of more healthy as age matched as for what my mom was. You know, does that make a difference? It absolutely does. You know, we see that in medicine in all different subspecialties. Like you think of it in terms of how much physiologic reserve do you have. You know, so you can be a really healthy 83-year-old, or you can be a really sick 50-year-old, and that healthy 83-year-old is going to do better globally if they're just doing stuff like, I don't know, having a knee replacement surgery or something like that. You know, something completely not brain related.
Quick HDSA announcement, you guys are free to stay in chat. If you want to stay in chat, there's the